When I was younger, I used to spend a lot of my time at my cousin's house. At the time, I was 5 or 6 years old, and I went to my cousin's house for a sleepover. When I arrived, I noticed their parents were not home. My cousins were home alone. I had 4 cousins in total, but only 2 of them were home at the time. We had the best day ever. We spent most of our time playing, but after we ate dinner, we noticed something strange. We were sitting in the living room when we heard my cousin's dog, Dora, barking continuously. We ignored Dora's barking at first, but eventually my cousins decided to go investigate, leaving me all alone. I nervously waited for my cousins to return, hoping it was just an animal that Dora was barking at. That was when I began to hear small thuds hitting the door leading outside to the balcony. It was as if someone was repeatedly throwing small rocks at it. I built up the courage to check out the window, and as I approached the door, the thud stopped. I peeked out the window, and what I saw terrified me. There was nothing out there, no pebbles in front of the door, and no one that could have knocked. I was so confused. And I still believe that was a ghost knocking to this day. I ran back to my spot to wait for my cousins, keeping my eye towards the balcony. My eyes eventually drifted away from the window, but when I looked back, I saw something that hadn't been there before. In the window, I saw what looked to be an alien-shaped person staring back at me. I screamed at him, asking him who he was and telling him to leave. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, until finally turning around and walking out of sight. After the man walked away, I heard the thuds on the door again. They were getting louder and louder. I didn't know what to do. A few minutes later, my cousins burst into the room, telling me that someone was on the property, and that is why Dora was barking. I told my cousins about the noise, and we decided to go outside to see what the man was doing. We got outside and couldn't find him at first, but as we peeked around the corner of the house, we saw him. He was standing in the middle of the backyard, staring at the house, and gripped tightly in his hand was a knife. I felt my cousin pull my shoulder as she took off back towards the safety of the house. She locked all the doors, as my other cousin closed all the blinds. We went into full lockdown mode, trying our best to hide. Every 10 minutes, my cousin would go check on the man, but each time would return to tell us the man was still there. This went on for about an hour, until finally we checked to see the man was nowhere to be seen. This freaked us out at first, thinking he may have found a way into the house, but after searching, we determined the man had finally left us alone. Until this day, I cannot believe this happened to us, but all I can do is hope it never happens again. This story takes place when I was in middle school. At the time, I had a small friend group that consisted of 3 other guys. We spent the majority of our weekends with each other, but this weekend was a little more special. It was a Friday night, and it was my friend Jordan's birthday. For his party, he decided to have our friend group over for a sleepover. We spent the first part of the evening eating pizza and birthday cake. Then as the sun went down, we retreated to the basement and started playing Xbox. We were in the middle of a game when one of my friends brought up ding-dong ditching. As young teens, we still loved the thrill of waking grown adults in the middle of the night, so we all agreed it would be a fun idea. But we had to wait until Jordan's parents fell asleep. We spent the next few hours playing video games and watching a movie. It was around 1 in the morning when we realized Jordan's parents had gone to bed, so we got ready to leave. We snuck out of the basement window and headed down the dark street. Our plan was to ring people's doorbells and then hide across the street in the neighbor's yard. The first few houses we rang were uneventful, with the average response being an angry yell or simply the porch light turning on. But then we found the perfect house. It was a small house towards the end of a dead-end street. Across from it was an empty lot with a wooden fence running across the back of the property. We checked out behind the fence and realized it would be a perfect hiding spot. I volunteered to ring the doorbell, so I ran up to the house, rang the bell, and ran back to the fence as fast as I could. As soon as I got behind the fence, the porch light turned on, and a middle-aged man opened the door. He was clearly angry and shouted at the top of his lungs. He searched around his yard and the side of his house and was obviously getting more and more angry. He eventually gave up and went back inside and turned his porch light off. We knew his reaction was too priceless not to get his house again. So I ran back across the street and crept up the front steps. I reached out to ring the bell, and as soon as I did, the light turned on and the door flung open. The man screamed out, "Gotcha!" in a terrifying tone, and I took off running down the yard. I heard the man chasing after me, so I started running towards the street, away from my friends. But as I left the man's yard, I heard him slow down. I didn't care. I kept running towards the end of the road. But then I heard an engine roar to life, and I turned around to see the man reversing out of his driveway in his truck. I knew I had to get away, so I ran towards the back of the neighborhood, where there was a small patch of woods. I hid in the woods for about 10 minutes, and eventually came out in a different section of the neighborhood. I quickly realized I had never been to this part before. It looked unfinished, with only a few houses and a couple streetlights that worked. I was just relieved to be away from the man and started walking down the street. That's when I saw something under one of the working streetlights. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked oddly human. As I got closer, I realized it was an old man. He was just standing there, staring blankly. I wondered if he needed help, so I asked him if he was okay, but he didn't answer. I took a step closer and asked again, as the man continued to stare off. The old man slowly turned his head, and his look switched from blank to evil. He stared down at me and hissed, "Get away from me." I took off running as fast as I could. I cut through people's backyards and jumped fences. I did whatever I could to get away from him. I finally made it back to Jordan's house and found them waiting for me on the back deck. They could tell I was scared and asked what had happened. I told them everything, and they didn't believe me at first, but eventually, we all agreed that we would never go ding-dong ditching again. While that decision only lasted a couple months, I will never forget the look on the man's face when he opened the door, or the way the old man's voice sounded in my ears. This happened to me a few years back, when I was still in high school. I was in class, just hanging out with my buddy, when he mentioned that he was house sitting for a family he knew in town over the weekend. He explained that he was allowed to invite an extra person, and that he was getting paid for it. So when he invited me to come stay with him, I eagerly accepted. We arrived at the house and met the family, who gave us the lowdown on what we needed to do. They had 2 dogs that needed taken care of, but aside from that, everything was pretty straightforward. The family left to go down to the lake, and we settled in for the evening. We spent most of the night playing with the dogs and making dinner. Later on, we decided to watch a movie in the living room. As the movie played, we saw headlights pull into the driveway. It was only 9 p.m., so we figured it could be a friend of the family, but it still seemed very out of place. However, The car sat in the driveway for about 10 minutes, until we finally heard a loud knock on the door. Both of us went over to answer it, only opening it halfway. It was a bulky man who looked to be in his 30s. He told us that he was the kids' real father, and he was here to pick them up. We looked at him confused and told him that they were gone at the lake. That seemed to just make the dad mad. He said we were lying, claiming that we were the babysitters. We quickly realized that he was getting more aggressive and that we could smell alcohol on his breath. We tried to shut the door, but the man tried to keep it open. It took both of us, but we forced the door closed and locked it. But then the man began pounding on it. We watched him try a couple of windows before giving up and peeling out of the driveway. We called the family, and they explained who he was, saying that he was the kid's real dad, but he was crazy and didn't have custody. They instructed us to call the police if he came back, but thankfully, the rest of the night went smoothly. I was in bed in one of the bedrooms, about to fall asleep, when I heard someone walking outside. I checked the time and saw that it was past midnight, so I crawled to the window and peeked out. That's when I saw the same man, on the other end of the house, trying to pry open a window. I jumped out of bed and ran to wake my friend. We locked ourselves into the bedroom while we called the cops. We watched out the window as the man tried to pry each window, not knowing he was being watched. And the cops eventually showed up and were able to catch him before he made an escape. The family ended up coming home early the next day, and we were glad to see them. We told them what happened, and they were grateful that we were okay. I don't know where that man is today, but let's hope I never meet him again.